The human arrived carrying a weapon the Veth had retired 4 centuries ago. Instructor Secundus Aurak noted this in the same manner he noted everything. Without surprise, without judgment, with the patience of someone who had catalogued 11,000 trainees across 30 years of service. He stood at the edge of the processing plateau and watched the transport lower its ramp, and watched the human walk down it. And what he registered first was not the weapon, but the way she carried it slung across her chest, muzzle down, one hand resting on the stock the way you might rest a hand on the shoulder of someone you knew well. The plateau sat 3,000 meters above the valley floor, carved flat by the original settlers before the Veth had a word for war. In winter, it was open to the sky on all 4 sides, and the wind moved across it without obstruction, and everything on it was cold. 42 trainees from 7 species had arrived in the previous hour. They stood in rough formation, the Veth contingent in perfect lines. The others clustered at uncertain distances from the lines, reading the geometry of the space and not quite finding their place in it. The human walked to the edge of the Veth formation and stopped. She looked at the lines, she looked at the sky, she set down her pack and, in full view of the plateau, and the 42 trainees and Aurak himself, she sat down cross-legged on the cold stone, opened her pack, and removed a small cloth and a bottle of oil. She began to clean her rifle. The sound it made, the click and pull of the bolt, the mechanical intimacy of it carried across the plateau with a precision that the wind didn't diminish. Several of the Veth trainees turned their heads by increments too small to constitute a break in formation. The non-Veth trainees simply stared. Aurak had seen humans before. He had not seen one like this. He walked to her. She looked up. "Processing formation is at 0900, he said. "I know," she said. "I have 10 minutes. She returned to the rifle. Aurak looked at it. Bolt action, he calculated. Single round manual cycling. The mechanism dated, by his estimate, to the pre-industrial period of Earth's northern continental conflicts, adapted and rebuilt by hands he could not see. The barrel had been replaced. The stock had been worn smooth by use. "This weapon is not on the approved materiel list," he said. "I know," she said again. She drew the cloth along the barrel's length. "I requested an exemption. It was granted." "By whom?" "The Accord Liaison, Attachment 7 of my transfer documentation." She did not look up. "You can verify it." He already had. He had read her file the night before, as he read all files. The exemption was there, 3 lines in bureaucratic language that said, in essence, "The human may keep her antique." He had not understood it then. He understood it less now, watching her work. At 0900 she stood, slung the rifle, and walked into formation. The processing ceremony was a Veth ritual. Each trainee presented to the unit secundus in order of species seniority, received a rank seal, and was assigned to a training cohort. It was efficient. It was quiet. The Veth trainees moved through it like water finding level. When it was her turn, she stepped forward and said her name Piera, and accepted the seal, and took 1 step back. Nothing in the ceremony required anything more. The ceremony did not require her to speak, or to explain herself, or to account for the weapon on her chest. She did none of those things. After, Aurak watched the cohort assignments sort themselves into groups across the plateau. Piera was assigned to Unit 7. 8 Veth trainees, who had already found formation with the ease of people who had been practicing this particular dance since childhood. She walked to them and stood at the formation's edge. They did not look at her. They did not need to look. They knew she was there. In the late afternoon, Aurak ran the first demonstration drill. Unit 7 and 3 other units, 400 Veth trainees total, deployed across the plateau's eastern face and, on no signal that Aurak could perceive, raised weapons and fired. 400 shots arrived at 400 targets in what the instruments recorded as a 0.003 second variance window. Piera watched from the formation's edge, where she had been placed as observer. Afterward, Aurak walked past her. "Your unit fired as one," she said. "Yes," he said. "How do they decide when?" He stopped. It was not the question he had expected. Trainees from other species asked times, "How do I join?" Or times can I be trained? Or, occasionally, is it technology? They do not decide, he said. Consensus is not decision. It is the absence of the need for decision. She was quiet for a moment. My grandfather used to say the hardest shot is the one you wait for. And the others? The ones where you don't. She chambered around. The sound stopped the wind, or seemed to. Several of the nearest Veth trainees turned, full rotations of the head, which was not nothing. Orcs made a note in his file. Not about the weapon. About the woman holding it. Prognosis. Correction required. He wrote it, and then he read it back. And for the first time in 30 years he was not certain he had used the right word. The Veth did not argue. Argument implied that consensus had failed, which implied the unit was broken, which implied something had gone wrong at the level of formation itself. What they did instead, when values collided, was go quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of people holding their tongues. The quiet of people in whose shared understanding a fracture had appeared, and who were, collectively and without discussing it, deciding how to proceed. Orcs had learned to read that quiet. It sounded different from regular silence. It had a texture. On the third day of live fire training, Unit 7 went quiet. The range occupied the plateau's southern table, 40 meters of exposed stone, 12 target stations, a crosswind that the instruments measured at 11 knots, and that the trainees felt in their teeth. Orcs stood at the range's far end and watched through a scope. Unit 7 came up online. 8 Veth and 1 human. They found formation with their habitual ease, spacing exact, posture aligned, weight distributed as though they had been measured against each other. Piera stood at the right edge of the line. She had not been told to stand there. She had found it herself, the way water finds the low point. Orcs gave no command. None was needed. Unit 7 raised weapons. And then they fired, but not entirely as one. The 0, 0, 0, 3. Second variance. That was the unit's signature. Their particular rhythm. Their collective breath, stretched by a fraction. The instruments caught it. 0.031 seconds. 10 times the variance. Not a failure by any external standard. But Orcs knew, and the unit knew, that it was not what they were. He reviewed the target data afterward. 7 of the 8 Veth trainees had hit their assigned targets with the precision he expected. The 8th, the target at the right edge station, Piera's station, had been struck 6 centimeters above center. Better than assigned. Considerably better. She had not fired with them. She had fired after them her own timing, reading her own target, and her shot had corrected for a variable in the wind that the unit's consensus calculation had missed. He called her to his briefing room that evening. It was a small room, stone walls, a table, 2 chairs. She sat across from him and did not fidget. The rifle was present, leaning against the wall beside her, as though it also had business here. Unit 7's consensus variance increased in your presence, he said. I know. Your deviation from unit fire timing produced a superior result on your assigned target. Yes. I am asking you to explain your decision. She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Outside, the wind had picked up. The plateau made a sound at night, a low pressure against the stone that had taken Orcs years to stop noticing. I wasn't making a decision, she said. I was reading the wind. It shifted at the last second, 3 degrees northeast. The unit had already committed. You could have communicated the variable. In 0.003 seconds. He was quiet. I was trained to read my target alone, she said. My grandfather built this rifle for a world where there was no unit, where you were the only person with a gun. So the gun teaches you, it teaches through its mechanism, through the way it makes you work, that the decision is yours, that it has always been yours. In Veth doctrine, he said, the individual who fires outside consensus is a failure state. In human doctrine, she said, the unit that can't function without consensus is a casualty waiting for the right moment. The briefing room held that between them. Your unit doctrine assumes survival of the group, she said. Ours assumes survival of the last one standing. Orcs looked at her file. He had written times correction required times 2 days ago. He did not correct it now. He looked at it for a long time, the way you look at a word in a language you thought you knew. You will work within unit fire timing tomorrow, he said. I'll try, she said, which was not quite what he had asked for, and both of them knew it. She picked up her rifle on her way out. Orc listened to her footsteps cross the outer corridor. He sat in the briefing room for a while after she was gone, thinking about a world where you were the only person with a gun, and what that world would require of you, and what it would leave behind. The canyon exercise was designed to be failed. That was its function, not punishment, not selection, but a controlled demonstration of limits. Orc had designed it 20 years ago, based on a principle the Veth High Consensus had encoded in the 4th volume of military doctrine. The soldier who discovers the boundary of their method is more prepared than the soldier who has never met it. In practice, this meant 8 kilometers of canyon terrain at night, comm network active, with 3 embedded tactical problems that unit consensus could solve in the order they were designed to be solved. The unit would solve them, or they would not. And what they learned in either case was the shape of their own formation under pressure. He had run it 600 times. It had never produced what it produced on the 14th night of training. Unit 7 entered the canyon at 2,200 hours. Orc watched through the observation relay, which fed data from 17 sensors positioned along the canyon walls. Sound, thermal, position. He could see the unit as a cluster of thermal signatures moving with their characteristic coherence, 8 shapes that breathed and stepped in rhythm. At 2,247 hours, the simulated comm failure activated. The unit stopped. This was expected. Protocol under comm failure. Halt. Secure position. Await signal restoration. 47 minutes. Standard. The protocol existed because 47 minutes was an acceptable tactical delay, because Veth consensus required the shared channel to form, because moving without consensus was per doctrine worse than not moving at all. The unit halted. 8 thermal signatures, motionless, in a canyon at night. The 9th signature moved. Orc leaned forward. Piera walked the perimeter of the halted unit. Not quickly, not slowly walking the way someone walks when they are thinking with their feet. She went to the canyon's eastern wall and put her hand on it. She crouched and looked at something on the ground. She stood and looked up at the canyon rim, and Orc saw her raise the rifle not to shoot, but to look through the scope as a tool. His mind supplied the word spyglass. She pulled something from her boot, a bootlace. She held it horizontal, estimating angle, measuring something Orc could not immediately identify. He replayed the sensor data and understood. She was measuring the width of a shadow cast by the moon, estimating the angle of a gap in the canyon wall to the northeast that the tactical map had marked as an unpassable ravine. She walked back to the unit. "There's a way through," she said, and her voice came through the observation relay clearly. "Northeast wall, where the shadow breaks. The ravine has a ledge maybe 2 meters wide, maybe less. I can see it from here." The unit did not respond. No consensus channel. No way to form a collective judgment. "I'm going to walk it," she said. "I'll talk the whole time. You'll be able to hear me. If it's passable, I'll come back. If it's not, we wait for restoration." Silence. She walked northeast. And she talked. She talked the way someone talks when they are alone in a difficult place and have decided that the sound of their own voice is a tool. Not reassurance. Not instruction narration. "The ledge is here. Width, maybe 1.5 meters. The stone is solid, no fracture. There's a drop on the left, about 4 meters, but the ledge is enough for single file. I'm at the midpoint. The other side opens to the secondary canyon. The route continues." Factual. Patient. A field researcher describing what they find. At 2,301 hours, Orc watched one thermal signature detach from the cluster and begin moving northeast. Trainee Telvar. 4th-year Veth. Top of his cohort. He moved without consensus, because there was no consensus to be had, and something not logic, not doctrine, the observation relay, could not record what it was, had moved him. The others followed at 2,303. They moved through the ravine single file, Piera in front, Telvar second, the rest behind. Piera talked the whole way through. She was still talking when they emerged on the other side, and the canyon opened ahead of them, and Unit 7 completed the exercise 17 minutes ahead of the restoration window. In his briefing room afterward, Orcs reviewed the footage for 3 hours. He pulled Pierra's Earth training record. It was 40 pages, dense with notation, written in a military language that was not quite the same as the one he used. The same words, different weight. He read all 40 pages. He read them the way you read something you suspect is going to change something, not knowing yet what. At the top of the file, in the summary field, someone had written, "Trainee demonstrates exceptional independent function under communication failure. Recommend advanced placement." He did not write anything in his own file that night. He sat with the footage and the 40 pages and the sound of the plateau wind, and he thought about the shape of Telvar's decision the moment a Veth soldier had moved through a gap in the channel and found, on the other side, a human voice still talking. The Veth High Consensus had reviewed the canyon footage and reached a unanimous decision. The human was dangerous. Orcs received the tribunal summons on the 16th morning. It arrived as all High Consensus communications arrived, not as an instruction, but as an expression of settled judgment, the way weather arrives. The tribunal would convene at 1,400 hours in the Accord Chamber at the Plateau's Administrative Center. The human trainee Pierra would attend. Instructor Secondus Orcs would attend as witness. He spent the morning on the range. Unit 7 was running target sequences without him, which they were capable of, and he stood at the far end and watched them through his scope and thought about the word times, dangerous. The Veth used it precisely. It did not mean violent, or hostile, or ill-intentioned. It meant a variable we cannot account for within our existing structure, an element whose behavior we cannot predict by the methods we have developed to predict behavior. Dangerous meant the model broke. He had used the word himself in his note on the first day. He had written it as diagnosis. The tribunal had read it as confirmation. The Accord Chamber was a high-vaulted room of pale stone, old enough to predate the current treaty structure. The 5 generals of the High Consensus sat at a curved table at the room's far end. They moved with the coherence of a single organism, heads that turned together, hands that settled on the table in the same moment, a stillness between them that was not the stillness of individual people being quiet, but of a collective that had already decided everything worth deciding before the meeting began. Pierra stood in the room's center. She was wearing her training uniform. The rifle was, for once, absent. Her hands were clasped behind her back. The senior general spoke. The others spoke simultaneously, or nearly a half-beat behind, which created a depth to the words. A resonance. Trainee Pierra, you have been reviewed. I understood I would be, she said. Your presence in Unit 7 has produced a measurable degradation of consensus variance. In the canyon exercise, you prompted a unit member to act outside the communication channel. Both outcomes are, under Veth military doctrine, failure states. She said nothing. You will be reassigned to an observer role. Your training certification will be amended to reflect consultative capacity only. This is not a judgment of your individual skill. It is a judgment of compatibility. Orcs watched her. She was very still. Not the stillness of the Veth, which was a trained and collective stillness. The stillness of water in a deep place. Her stillness was different, the stillness of someone deciding what to say. May I ask a question? She said. The generals looked at each other. It was the first time since entering the room that they had not been perfectly synchronized. Proceed, the senior said. In the canyon exercise when the network went down, what was your protocol for getting the unit out? Await signal restoration. How long does restoration take? 47 minutes. And if the tactical situation required movement in that window? The protocol exists because movement without consensus is... I'm not asking about the protocol, she said. I'm asking what you do. The room was quiet. Not argument. Not defiance. She was not angry, or performing composure. She had asked, with the genuine interest of someone who wanted to know, what they did in the gap. The generals were quiet for long enough that Orcs understood they did not have an answer that the protocol covered. He had been called as a witness. Witnesses in Veth proceedings spoke when addressed. He had not been addressed. He raised his hand in the formal request to speak gesture, a gesture so rarely used in this chamber that one of the generals looked at it as though trying to identify the custom. He was permitted. "She is dangerous," he said. He looked at the tribunal, then at Piera, then at the tribunal again. "I recommend we learn from her before we remove her." The tribunal recessed. It was the first time in Oroc's 30 years of service that he had seen a unanimous body recess over a question. He stood in the corridor afterward and waited. Piera came out and stood beside him. Neither of them spoke immediately. The corridor was stone, the same pale stone as the chamber, and it was cold the way everything on the plateau was cold, the cold that had become familiar enough to feel like the atmosphere of the place itself. "Thank you," she said. "I said you were dangerous," he said. "I know," she said. "It's the most accurate thing anyone here has said about me." He looked at her. She was watching the corridor's far end, where a window let in the flat afternoon light. Her hands were still clasped behind her back. 30 years, and he still found it difficult to read human faces not because they concealed, but because they expressed too much at once, several things layered, and he was always uncertain which layer to trust. "The generals have no answer for the gap," she said. I could see it. "The gap has not, historically, required an answer," he said. "The protocol functioned. Until it doesn't." "Yes," he said. "Until it doesn't." The tribunal returned 17 minutes later. Piera would remain in combat training. She would be monitored. A formal review would occur at certification. The word times, dangerous times, did not appear in the amended ruling. Orac noted its absence. The Veth did not change their doctrine. That is not how consensus cultures change, not in a single season, not because of one woman. What changed was smaller and more durable, and did not have a name in the doctrine volumes. Orac knew. He had watched enough change to recognize it in the places the official record never looked. The certification exercise was designed for the full training cohort, all 12 units deployed across the plateau's northern face, in a 6-hour scenario that moved through terrain, comm challenge, coordinated fire, and a final extraction sequence. It was designed to test everything the training had built. It was not designed to be revelatory. At 0600 hours, Unit 7 moved to their assigned sector. Orac watched from the command observation post, a stone structure at the plateau's center from which the entire northern face was visible. He watched through the relay and through his own scope, alternating. Unit 7 moved with their habitual precision. 8 Veth and 1 human, the formation that had learned, over 6 weeks, to be itself. At 0839 hours, the scenario's first comm degradation event activated. Unit 7 was in a shallow depression, in the terrain-covered position, good sight lines, 200 meters from their next objective. They would have 12 minutes before signal restoration. The unit stopped. Piera did not stop. She rose from position and walked the terrain's edge, looking northeast, the same direction she had looked in the canyon. Orac watched. She returned and said something to the unit and pointed. Telver rose. This was not what had happened in the canyon. In the canyon, Telvar had followed. Here, he walked to the terrain's edge and stood beside Piera, and looked where she was pointing, and then he looked at her and said something, and she nodded, and he walked northeast, and she fell in beside him. Not behind, beside. The rest of the unit came up and moved with them, and Orac watched 8 Veth soldiers and 1 human navigate a gap in their consensus by moving through it together, not led, not following, but doing the thing that soldiers learn, after long practice, to do, which is to trust the person beside them with the half of the decision they cannot make alone. The scenario threw its unscripted variable at 1014 hours. A second blackout zone, deeper than the first, covering the extraction sequence. This was not in the exercise design. Orac had added it the night before, and he had not told anyone. Unit 7 entered the blackout zone. They stopped. Piera stopped with them. She did not move to the terrain's edge. She did not raise the rifle as a scope. She looked at the unit, and the unit had no channel, and there was nothing in 40 pages of her Earth training record that covered this specific problem, and Orac watched her decide, not to decide. She looked at Telvar. Telvar looked at the terrain. He walked to the depression's eastern edge and crouched and put his hand on the ground, the same gesture Piera had made on the canyon wall. Orac realized. The gesture of reading through touch. He stood and looked at the unit. He moved. Piera fell in behind him. The unit extracted in 11 minutes. Telvar led. Piera followed. Middle of the formation. Talking, still narrating the world she could see. And Orac understood that what she was doing was not leading from behind. She was making it possible to follow. She was being the voice in the gap, so that whoever was in front could use all of their attention on what was ahead. The scenario completed at 1,203 hours. All units returned to the plateau's center. Orac walked the perimeter of the returned cohort, the way he did after every major exercise, noting faces, posture, the specific quality of exhaustion, what the body reported, that the debrief would not. He found Unit 7 at the plateau's eastern edge. 8 Veth trainees, debriefing in the way Veth debrief quietly, internally, the shared processing that looks like silence from outside, and Piera, sitting on the stone with her rifle across her knees, running the cloth along the barrel the way she had on the first morning. Telvar was sitting beside her, not watching her, not debriefing, exactly. Present. The way people are present, who have been through something together, and are still near enough to it, that being near each other is enough. Orac stood at a distance and watched. He was trying to name what he was looking at. He had words for most things he had seen in 30 years of training soldiers. He had words for unit cohesion, and for individual excellence, and for the specific bond that forms between people who have navigated danger together. He did not have a word for this. A Veth soldier, sitting beside a human, while she cleaned a 4-century-old rifle on a cold stone plateau, neither of them speaking, both of them precisely where they had decided to be. In his report, filed that evening, he wrote, "The human did not teach us individualism. She taught us that the gap between signals is not empty. It can be moved through." He read it back. He kept it. The next morning, Piera's transport departed at 0500. He did not go to see her off. This was not custom. The Veth did not observe departures as occasions. But he was awake, in his office, when the transport's engines came up, and he went to the window. The plateau in early morning was a specific shade of gray, the gray of stone that has been cold so long it has forgotten other temperatures. He could see the transport on the launch pad at the far end, and he thought he could see, at this distance, the shape of a person walking toward it, with something across their chest. The transport lifted. He watched it until it was a point of light, and then, until it was gone. He turned from the window. His office had the report on the desk, and the training files for the next cohort arriving in 4 days, and a scope he had carried since his first year of service. He picked up the scope and looked through it at the empty launch pad. He put it down. He had no instrument for what he had learned. This was, he understood, appropriate. You don't measure a thing that teaches you the limits of your measuring. You carry it, instead, the way you carry a way of looking. And you see differently, ever after. And you do not always know what you are seeing. And that is the beginning of it, not the end. Outside, the plateau wind moved across stone that had forgotten other temperatures. The day was starting. The cold was the cold it always was. 4 days until the next cohort. He sat down and opened the first file.